Good afternoon, friends. Again, I'm back. I just realized I just literally reviewed my last video, and I realized I just said the exact same thing. I guess that's something that comes sort of natural. Just I want to give more context of what's going on. So again, I'm not trying to be a big YouTuber to make money off. Although I would be kind of cool if that came, I would embrace it. Although not my goal. I'm not trying to. I recently went through some of my old channels I subscribe to and comparing myself to, say, Nick Oizon, aka Trainer Tips Nick, whose uh, material is very impressive. I have no idea how to edit videos or do all the little cool sound effects, or I didn't have a drone to like get a cool panoramic shot of whatever. Again, I'm more of a book reader, so to speak. So that's not. Next channel after that would be Comics Explained. That's what I was referring to before. Rob from the Rob Core. I guess I'm part of the Rob Core because I've watched so many of his videos. I'm so used to his voice, and I guess I can say I almost kind of mimic him to some extent. So, hey, we're back, you guys. Or at the end, it goes, and I'll talk to you later. Peace. No, Rob Core. If you for some reason you landed, I love your videos. Great, explain all these things. Um, but anyways, what I'm here to do, and back to the agenda. So my last video was 24 minutes long. That was really long. I actually had some trouble uploading it. I think it was uploaded today, although I wanted to upload it last night. So even though it just uploaded, anyways, I reviewed it already. I took my notes, and I know what I want to talk about. Yesterday, I thought I made a pretty decent outline on things, but I felt like I was also rushing through it. So today I'm going to take a step back and see if I can kind of curb it to 15 minutes. Um, and today, actually, I want to talk more about books. Excuse me. I started going on it in my last video, and I figure I should fill in on more of those things. So the first thing I talked about on the books is that the first book I cited was Jonathan Kozol. This is it right here. Jonathan Kozol, Savage Inequalities. And I talked about it pretty good in the last video where he talks about how schools are funded, which are done by property values. And if property values are not higher, then schooling does not get the funding they should. This compounded with the idea that lower income neighborhoods tend to live in apartments, right? Which crams more people into a smaller plot of land with cheaper apartments. So in essence, if you take a region where it has more apartments, there's more kids that are assigned to that local school, but yet the funding is not as abundant since it's lower income. While you contrast that to, say, a rich, affluent neighborhood, you have bigger land plots, higher values, and less kids. So, I mean, for me, this was jarring. I'm not going to get too into it, but it kind of explains this kind of class / stratification thing going on. And I think for Kozol, the one thing he's demonstrating is if education is supposed to be like the great equalizer, and if you just work hard and you go to school, you learn something, and you can make just as much money as the rich guy around, which I would argue against, and which is why I like Kozol's argument that actually schools don't exactly function as a great equalizer as you would think. Yeah, it does for some people. My example is one. I mentioned that I achieved a master's degree, and I think I'm only like the third or fourth in my family. On both sides of my family, who've actually done that. I could be wrong. I want to say 5 or 6 now. I'm not actually people, but that's something else. So these social injustices, I'm into that stuff. Jonathan Kozol, Savage Inequalities, written back in 1991, and I believe there's still a lot of things held true to it. And he's actually got a series of books on that, but that's that. The next book I mentioned, I referenced, but I didn't get that into it, is the Arlie Hochschild book with Anne Machon called The Second Shift. Shout out to feminists out there. I'm not a feminist person. I guess the nuanced term is called ally. I guess you could say I'm an ally. Yeah, I do believe in more progressive women's rights, so to speak. But anyways, this book is more of a qualitative research thing versus a quantitative research. Quantitative is more numbers. You go out there, you make tallies, you categorize it, and then you can say, oh, 50% of this, 40% of that, 20% of this, blah, 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 blah. Qualitative is more, she sits down with these people throughout a long period of time, probably records some of their, their feedback from questions, and transcribe it to something that you can kind of, if she does it with enough people with longer term, it's something you can kind of delve into and get to the nitty gritty of what's going on. As I mentioned in my last video, like the whole second shift, as you can kind of see the woman, she's balancing everything in life, and she's got a kid in her hand. That's not, again, contrast to the 1950s. That wasn't the typical thing. I mean, I know, hands down, today, it's different. I know that it's different. But it's still, these are kind of notions that are still going on that I think should be challenged. Anyways, that's that. But those two qualify under my sociology category. What I have in mind for you guys, what I'm about to get into, is more of my political philosophy development. I took these courses not exactly in sequential order, but I'm going to present them to you. Not all of it, but just give you some appetizers, if you will, some quick synopsis of some of the books I've read, and that I think are more landmark and, potentially significant. So, I mentioned in my last video about Plato and Aristotle. That era is ancient political thought. These are the guys, the ancient Greeks. These are the two I have an example are Peloponnesian War and Aristotle, if you can see that. Aristotle had more of this idea of running to the center. Now, I say that only in reference to the American election that's going on today. How, you have like, Biden and Sanders are fighting for the nomination of the DNC. And then you have Trump. And then essentially what a lot of American pundits would argue is they run to the center to try and encompass both as many left and right voters as they can. That idea was almost kind of developed or initiated by Aristotle, where he says something along the lines of, to kind of curb the extremes, when you have a wide variety of like ideas or beliefs, when you find the center, you meet that kind of compromise of both sides, and in essence, that's how you encompass the most. And I mean, it's not the way I verbalize it. I make it seem like it fits word for word. It doesn't exactly do that, but you can kind of see where the remnants of Aristotle's idea kind of still run into American politics today. That's pretty astounding. I mean, again, if these guys are writing like in the BC area and BC era, and they're still doing it, that's pretty amazing. Imagine writing a book that 2,000 years later that they're still doing. That's crazy. Peloponnesian War, Thucydides. There's a number of ways to look at this book. You can look at it at the ancient Greek kind of principles, power, coercion, stuff like that. Like, is there morality? And essentially no, because power or might makes right. Is one of the arguments here. Another way to look at this, shout out to one of my recent professors, Saccarelli. I'll just say his name like that. This also kind of shows that there's a dichotomy. It depicts. Well, it doesn't depict, because you have to kind of look in between the lines. But basically, it describes more or less kind of a division within society. There are those who have and those who have not, to put it very crudely. One of the examples, amongst many you can say, is that when it came to Sparta going against Athens, you can see... Okay, so I don't want to get too historical on you, but for example, when you have two camps or two societies and they're going at each other, the way they kind of spread is by spreading their ideas. So in the Peloponnesian War, when it's Sparta versus Athens, those dominating societies would kind of impose their similar ideas to the smaller towns and cities. So if it was a Spartan city territory, they would tend to be more of an aristocracy. If they were like an ally of Greece, they would tend to be more democratic. And looking at the nitty gritty, which again you kind of have to read in between the lines, you can see how certain, how do I word this carefully? You can see the back and forth of how the power, how political power is distributed either between a few or between a many, and how they kind of qualify those things. That's a lot to read in between, like just aside from the military tactics, from the battle things, from the prince, like yeah. In that sense, Zachary, that was pretty ingenious of you. I didn't get it right away first read through. I don't even know if I got it from the second time, but talking about it now, or even a third read, it's pretty astounding. That's ancient political thought. It's something to say that's ancient political thought A. Then the second one would be ancient political thought B. I don't know. But anyways, this is more of the medieval times. So 2 books I have here would be the kind of famous Prince by Machiavelli and Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes. Now, Hobbes, I don't like him at all. If you look into the background, this guy was basically a paranoid guy trapped up in his tower, afraid to do anything. And his writing kind of more or less kind of demonstrates that. He perceives humans to be, like, they need to be coerced, they need to be told what to do, because that's exactly how people in this era were. I'm holding myself back because I want to make comments on it, but I won't. Just leave it at that. Unless you want to hear it, then I can talk more about that later. The Prince, I think, is a little more fascinating in the sense that since we're watching Game of Thrones, okay, for those who are Game of Thrones fans, I'll make a comparison. King James, the fat guy, the one who is friends with Sean Bean, although he's a drunk and he fathers a lot of bastards, after he dies, they go around killing all these kids. And I had to explain to my girlfriend, like, well, why are they killing all the kids? And then, well, one of the things that explains in The Prince is when it comes to thrones, and once a king dies, a lot of people are vying for that power. Like a lot of it's kind of in-house family type thing. For example, like the brother from Game of Thrones wants to claim it, but yet his wife has her kid and she wants to put him to the throne because the wife feels like she can control him. Anyway, there's a lot of little things going on there, and the Prince kind of gets into that. Like, hey, if you want to be run a good kingdom, this is how you do it. Thus, the Prince. But again, there's 2 ways to read this, and one is to take it as a manual because Machiavelli wrote this to. I probably should have looked into it, but I remember that the context of the book, what it was supposed to be, it was written to a state official because he was trying to earn a job for something. Like, hey, this is what I can do, this is what I can write. And it seemed like just a very standard A, B, and C. This is what you do to be a good statesman. But another way to kind of put a twist to it is you take the last chapter, and Machiavelli is almost more or less kind of arguing. I don't want to give away the entire spoiler, so to speak. But okay, if you read one spins the last chapter in this book, one could say that Machiavelli is writing a message to someone who at least would unify Italy. That's a hypothesis. I won't say whether or not I believe it. If you believe, that'd be kind of cool. If this is something that catches your interest, we can talk about it, because some people don't believe it. They like to throw out that last chapter like it's nothing. Again, I've had 2 professors go through this book, Abdel-Nour and Takreli. Those 2 names, if I talk about my education, will come up a lot because those two have inspired me a lot. But this book is an example where Takreli and Abdel-Nour have 2 kind of different perspectives of how to read different books because of their perspectives. And man, kind of navigating between the 2, especially when it comes to books like this and other things, this is why I love this shit. Excuse me. So that's that medieval stuff. Next, I will go into what they like to call modern political thought. Now, modern political thought, I would say, is characterized by the Enlightenment. So, the Enlightenment, one of my kind of passionate topics that I really enjoy, is a sort of how do I describe? The world has been going on for a while now. Then you have like kind of philosophers coming in, and then there's like suddenly there's like a wave of thinking that emerges where instead of relying on the old, let's pray to the gods, let's just do things by tradition. There's a sort of thought that emerges like, hey, we can figure things out on our own. Like, oh, if there's religion, well, we can kind of, where did this come from? And there's a whole skew of ideas that kind of emerge on, not just on that note, because there are four principles of enlightenment. There's science, there's progress, there's cosmopolitanism, and, oh man, my professor will have my head if I can't list this last one. Science, progress, cosmopolitan, F me. Anyways, there's a whole wave of those things, and I have, actually, this could be encompassed in like 4 authors. I only have 3 because I think I only have 3 of the books. One would be Karl Marx, the infamous or famous Communist Manifesto. It's in here among other things. This is something I've really taken to heart. Kant, German philosophy. This guy is good. He says a lot of amazing things for his time. I can relate to him a lot, although he's not exactly where I sit, so to speak. And J.S. Mills on liberty. I think a lot of people who are into the American political spectrum relate to this a lot. But respectfully, I disagree. Anyways, from there, a whole skew of things kind of emerge. This whole thing of the Enlightenment is kind of a contentious idea because after the 1950s, people start to throw this idea out. But before I get into that, as I mentioned, the Enlightenment is something that's, again, inspired a lot of ideas, one of which helped inspire our country today, the United States of America. I mean, if you, obviously not United States of 2020, there's a... Going back to the ancient Greeks, A is not equal to A, so United States of 1776 does not equate to the United States of 2020. There are those who argue that. I'm sorry, you are morons. Anyways, back to this. United States 1776 was more or less a product of the Enlightenment. Again, I'm not going to get all American history on you, but you have colonists in one country, and you have their king across the ocean, and they're like, well, why do we have to pay attention to you? No taxation without representation, yada, yada, yada. And suddenly, men feel like they can govern themselves. Like, isn't that like a strange idea? So in that sense, I have the Federalist Paper, Madison, Hamilton, and Jay. Wow, I had like literally like 4 ideas I want to talk about, but I realized if I did, I'd have to like explain a whole lot more. Federalist Papers are, it's inspiring to see how the country was formed. Because again, as I said in the last video, these are guys who perhaps they're affluent, but they can get granted their time and their conditions. They still wrote things that are kind of being held on. Things that are being held on to today. People are fighting for it today. Whether or not being held on to is another thing. But again, 2,000 years, not 2,000 years, 1776, 200 years later, pardon my math, 200 years later, they're still trying to do. And again, there's 2 ways to look at this. You can take it as a empty nationalist thing, like, oh, look how cool we are. Or you can put in the grand context of things that, hey, the Enlightenment wasn't just an American idea. Thomas Paine, I don't have the book here. He was one of the earliest guys who argued for a sort of cosmopolitanism, a sort of a citizen of the world type thing. That's, I mean, granted that time, that's amazing. People can barely even think out of their own countries today, but yet this guy was arguing, like citizen of the world type shit. Excuse me. Common sense. I like that. Or hey, Thomas Paine actually. The other book I was referring to was his other writings, but I like this because when it comes to common sense put into its context, he wrote this pamphlet as an argument why the colonies should secede from Great Britain, right? And for anyone who ever has the argument like, oh, people don't have the notion to want to change. They're too dumb. They're too complacent in their world. I mean, look at common sense. So I mean, you have one could arguably go around this time and before common sense and say, you know, do you want to see from the king? Oh, it's not powerful. Oh, it's not doable. Oh, excuse me. I'm sure you guys saw all that already, and I'm at 20 minutes, so I should wrap it up real soon. Should we secede from the king? Oh, it's not possible. Oh, we don't have the arms, we don't have the ships, we don't have anything to do it. But yet, after a pamphlet like this, mine seemed to have changed. Like a switch was hit, and suddenly, let's take down the. I didn't know where I was going with that. Again, I need to wrap this up quick. So, last section, so I went through the ancient, the kind of medieval times, if you will, the Enlightenment, the modern political thought, the American political thought, and then, like I said, there's something called there's an era of like postmodern theory, postmodern philosophy, where people or philosophers have more or less kind of rejected the ideas of enlightenment, which is pretty strange. Like, what would make you think like maybe this is something I'm prone to, because I like to believe in the idea of progress, the idea of science, of moving forward, of like figuring things out for yourself, and they're not just abstract ideas that you don't just act like. Ideas come from somewhere, and you can figure these things out. But again, around the 50s and 60s, people started abandoning these things. And although I'm a proprietor of the Enlightenment, doesn't mean I don't read very carefully, very critically, postmodern thinkers, Foucault, or as one of my other not so prominent professors, Foucault, Michel Foucault. Small tidbit: Abdel-Nour knew my my kind of what's the word I'm looking for? He knew I was kind of geared towards the Enlightenment. I like thinking, and his specialty was postmodern, and he knew that, and he really did challenge me in a sense. And one of my final papers towards the end was a paper on this guy, and actually something about a lot of postmodernists is they like quite literally come down hard on Marx. I just wanted to say that to get that out there. If that's a very deep topic, if I was to ever talk about it in a video, man, I have to like go through my papers and do outlines all over. I don't even know if I could squeeze that down in 15 minutes. I can barely squeeze my little tour of my books in 20 minutes. That's that. And then there's this last guy, who Abdel-Nour was a big fan of, Habermas, or as my girlfriend likes to call it, habaneros, which I like habanero when it's very hot too, by the way. Habermas is pretty intense. This guy is like a tri-academic. He's political, he's social, sociology, so to speak, anthropological. This guy, I believe, is still alive, but he was trying to build a theory that was over-encompassing. It's not just political, it's not just social. And he's trying to trace it back, too. He's almost trying to reconstruct a theory for people to live their lives on. And it's communicative action, which is pretty amazing. Do I want to explain communicative action right now? Man, how do I do that? Basically, how can I say in 3 sentences that? Imagine I can see Abdel-Nour's face trying to limit Habermas to 3 sentences. Basically, it's 2 people communicate, and only when they communicate are things equal. Because it's not like I can talk down to you, someone can't just talk down to me. To be considered completely equal, we have to communicate. It's a dialogue, if you will. And from there, we can derive things. Yeah, that didn't really do it justice. I tried. But as the timer goes on, I'm at minute 25. That is very long. See, I've thoughts on this already. I should wait. I'm going to stop this for the time being, and I will. Mandalorian. Peace, guys.